Dr. Nick Williams.
I don't even know how to, it just has a stop transition. The good people at Apple have not come up with the calmly soften to silence option on the transitions. It just says stop, so it's a bit sad. My name is Dr. Nick Williams. I am a doctor, and there used to be good jokes about that. I forgot all of them. But if you've got a good, I was a doctor, on an airplane joke, please, form a queue. We'll just tell all of the good jokes. I have never been upgraded, ever. So I have not found many pros to being doctor. So I remember when I started my PhD, there was a web page I found because the web had been invented and people had put stuff on it. And it said, these are the reasons you shouldn't do a PhD. Like it was trying to warn people, because it's a long program. You go, years and years of your life, and you're not that old at the time, so it's, you're trying to help people to not do it, to go off and get real jobs. And half of the list was all the reasons I was going to do this. Upgrades, just to be called doctor, ladies, and none of those things came real. And so, so doctor is, and I don't know why I'm talking about this really. What was the silence? The silence, I'm trying to think of, I had a joke for that as well. All right, so I don't have a joke. I want to introduce you to something I think is really cool, and I'm going to do that by watching the video. Well, so I'm going to pretend to type. Ooh, look, I'm typing. That's not real. I can't pretend. So this is Cloud Foundry, and so I recently came from Engineered. We didn't use Cloud Foundry, but Cloud Foundry came out, and so I thought it was, secretly thought it was really cool. Couldn't talk about it because it wasn't what we used. But this is all open source, and this is it running a Heroku build pack for Ruby. Automatically picks up the version of Ruby that's in my gem file, all the stuff you get with Heroku. But the really cool part is this is running on my Amazon account. And I could do exactly the same video, and I could say this is running on my OpenStack machine. I'm cheap, so I only run OpenStack on one machine, which is not a very clever way to run OpenStack in production. You want many machines for resilience, etc. And I found, but in my time that I spent at Engineered, where obviously if you've not used Engineered and you need Rails hosting, you should definitely consider them as one of the options for things that are bigger than tiny little apps. But there's a part of me that cares about other people that don't get to use the Herokus and Engineereds of the world. And I started to really care about this idea that one day I was going to have a shit job in a large company, and they're going to make me use shit tools. And I started to worry about that person who's future me. And I'm very, we talk about other people. It's like, Sandy Metz talked about how, we should do things for other people, and that's awesome. And I really agree. One of those other people is me. So I'd like you all to spend a lot more time thinking about how you can make my life better, especially future me. And so I started to become very empathetic to this idea that I was going to have to go and work in other places. I can imagine the rest of my life, say another 30 or 40 years of working. I'm 38, and I plan on working for a very long time because it's going to keep me alive. There's a pro tip: don't retire, it kills you. Sandy talked about her father being 80 and still doing things. I think that's an excellent career plan, life plan. So I imagine working in large companies, they're going to have shit things, like bad technology. And if we can make great technology outside, that's great, but we have to get it inside these companies. And so I became really interested in Cloud Foundry because I wanted to get it inside big organizations. And the reason is, and this is sort of this idea of it's sugary and delicious. Who's ever worked in large companies with bad technology? Yeah. And the safe haven is to leave. And you get to pick up technologies like Ruby and use things like Heroku and lots of SaaS companies, right? They've all got beautiful websites, and you're not allowed to use any of them. And so the idea of getting Cloud Foundry into big companies is sort of my first, my first goal and dream, and the thing that, I work a lot. So this idea of balance, I hear about it, and I think it's foreign. I don't do balance very well. I have children and a wife, and I try to make sure that they think that I'm paying attention all the time. I have my parenting face on that looks, yes, that's really interesting, whilst I'm thinking of something else. I do not represent necessarily someone to copy in how to live a happy, healthy, long life. Who knows? But I think about this stuff all the time, and I can justify it because I think this is really important, this idea of getting good tools to people who don't necessarily get to choose good tools. And so I like Cloud Foundry because, if you've ever had to set up your own servers, it's better than that. If you've ever had to do that with Chef or Puppet, it's far better than that. And you get this easy interface to it, and build packs, etc. obviously make for a simple way of sharing. But the part that I care the most about, because you can go and use Heroku, you can always use public Cloud Foundry, but a part I really care about is not just how easy it is to use as a user of Cloud Foundry, but how easy it is for me to run the bastard. Well, no one ever talks about that. Like, if someone said, yeah, awesome, Nick, I'm going to run Cloud Foundry in my company, where do I get started? And I don't have a good answer, then I've said, well, one group of people gets nice, shiny, sugary things, but I hate you. And so I care very deeply about the idea of not just sugary on the outside, but sugary for the people that are going to stand this thing up. So this is the shiny logo for Cloud Foundry. It is, as much as I don't really understand the premise in my heart of the idea that open source is owned by someone. Pivotal, which so it used to be owned by VMware, and then VMware and someone else, EMC, got together and created a new company. You've probably heard the name Pivotal from Pivotal Labs, and they created a new company that, amongst other things, is sort of now the sponsor and maintainer and owner of these projects. You've probably seen Redis, Rabbit, the other ones are sort of Java-based. And so it's great that this is a new company, but they're now the ones that sort of own and drive Cloud Foundry. Kind of confusing to me for a while, but the really cool part is, unlike something like perhaps OpenStack, which is just hundreds of companies all contributing, and perhaps they ship things every 6 months and you sort of hope it goes well. As much as it doesn't fit into my mentality, watching Pivotal actually build product is pretty impressive, the stuff that comes out. So I'm just an open source person on the outside, but watching this project, which is entirely open source, move forward has been really impressive for the last 6 months. Anyway, this is their public website. If you wanted to use, if you instead of using Heroku, you could use the run. It's the run.pivotal.io. I think it's in public beta now. And so I decided that I was going to leave Engineer and create a company to do stuff with Cloud Foundry, because I kind of figured it's a really good business plan. So if you're looking for something that's going to protect you, like Sandy talked about, if you've ever felt that your job as a Rails developer was a bit too, non-differentiating, like, everyone's a Rails developer, how do I be different? That's why I sort of picked Cloud Foundry. I thought, if I was to sort of work in this space and it became a successful space, I'd have a successful company and get to, not have to worry about, the invention of lithography or whatever. I could keep doing my thing if I picked a winner. So now I have to convince you, follow the logic, I have to convince you that this is going to be successful so that it becomes successful so that I'm right. Which is very important to me because I don't like being wrong. So if you just sort of agree with me up front, this will go much better for me. So why Cloud Foundry? There's lots of good reasons. And firstly, if most people in this room would have used Heroku. Has anyone not used Heroku? I mean, you saw the demo, so you get the gist, but I do appreciate that someone may never have seen it. It is, I like to refer to it as the private version of Heroku, and I can do that because I don't own either of the brands. If you're a Cloud Foundry person, you're probably not going to say that. You're not going to sort of compare yourself. That's not what brands do. They don't say, well, we don't like to talk about them. I like to say it's just like Heroku, but you can run it. Otherwise you have to go and work on Heroku. And that's one option, but running it yourself is really cool. The ability to play with others. There's lots of awesome people. If you've ever done DevOps stuff, system administration, obviously what this is doing is completely automating all of this. So it's great to be able to play with others. People puts lots of, I have no doubt that this thing will continue to be developed for a very long time, which is important when you're trying to pick a tech stack. Jamie Van Dyke, otherwise known as Fear of Fish, he's a British guy. He said to me, he was getting into Cloud Foundry and he said, I love this, this is such a nerd fest. And I would never use that phrase out loud, but he said it, so now I can say it. But it is awesome. There's so much cool stuff in there. It's not almost entirely written in Ruby. Bits and pieces are being written in Go over time, and the container system is written in C. And the saving money. For some people, saving money is a good thing, so I thought it'd be interesting to show this. And I do apologize. This is not at all a Heroku versus Cloud Foundry idea, but since we've all used Heroku, we all know their pricing model. I just want to sort of put it in a context. So I apologize. So here are some comparisons of not competing companies, but different people essentially selling container technologies. And if you disagree with these prices, I apologize if I did the math wrong. But there's the URLs for like .cloud's pricing, whatever. This is just a bunch of companies selling containers. So with obviously connected up and run apps. So the price is interesting. I haven't really understood what DigitalOcean is, but I found their pricing was really interesting. But I don't think they provide the whole PaaS experience of deploying apps. So perhaps there's still a lot of DevOps chef work to be done on top of that. But here is what was sort of interesting as well. If you've never bought or looked at the big pricing of Amazon, when you start buying their big VMs, they get really cheap. And if you buy them with, the last one is if you buy them like the reserved instances, pay for like you pay up front, you say I'm going to reserve this for 3 years, and if you buy it for 3 years, to get down to $1.50 for a container is noteworthy. I mean, it's an impressive price difference to consider. Now, you are going to have to run it yourself. There's going to be costs. So this is not for everyone. Someone said, well, I'm paying about $200 to Cloud Foundry. Should I care? I'm like, nah, don't worry about it. I mean, Heroku is awesome, and the running version of Cloud Foundry is awesome. There's someone else is doing all the ops stuff for you. So this is really for people who are, running their own, they've got their own company. They're not allowed to run things. They can't let someone else run it. They've got to run it on their own infrastructure, vSphere or OpenStack. And so I just want to sort of compare prices, because I don't know why. I thought it was interesting. Cloud Foundry does have its own container technology because Docker hadn't come out yet. And I must admit, I got very cranky at the Cloud Foundry people a year ago when I first saw Warden, and I said, this is awesome! This is brilliant. They sort of showed the demo, and then they did nothing with it to promote it independently. So it just sat hidden inside of Cloud Foundry. And then Docker came out, everyone going, oh, Docker's brilliant! Look, and so Docker is, it's great that they've got that, and perhaps one day Cloud Foundry will rewritten to use Docker, who knows? But very similar in premise, the ability to spin up containers, to isolate apps and give them dedicated resources, just like what Heroku's been doing. And so it's certainly very cool if you ever want to play with cool, interesting tech. Docker and Warden are really interesting. So let's look at how you would build a platform as a service, should you wish to. Because certainly people, now that things like Docker have come out, people are saying, I might build a PaaS. And so let's talk about what, you're going to build a PaaS, let's build one. So first, you're going to run processes. You're going to run a Ruby app, it's going to be rack up, Rails server, whatever it is. And that has to run somewhere. We'll do that in a second. We're going to put that inside a container. So just to go through this container thing. So when Heroku had their Aspen and Bamboo stacks, they were not using containers. Your app, they had more primitive ways of isolating everyone's apps that ran on the same machines. But when they came up with container technology, they were using LXC, which uses some sort of advanced Linux. On Linux, it's using a thing called C groups. Other operating systems have their own container technologies like jails, etc. But if you've ever used, Cedar, then you've used containers, and they're truly a wonderful technology for getting great reuse of technology. You can run obviously multiple of them, but when you realize that, you're going to realize you're going to need something that's going to manage that container technology. Do not go and build your own container technology. There are many, many other harder problems to solve if you're going to build your own PaaS. Let's just use someone else's. Docker, Warden, LXC, and then so then that's sort of standalone. The next thing I want is something that represents your PaaS, something that's going to tell it to, here's an app, here's a build pack, please run it, please connect it to the internet. And then you're going to want to run that in a server. And you're then going to want to say, well, one server's great, I need more servers. And so just to go through the picture again, we've got, this is just us scaling out our PaaS. If you ever wondered, I mean, obviously Heroku's running it on Amazon, and until recently it was US East 1. And they have lots of VMs, and I think there's been demonstrations that you can sort of figure out that they're running it on the high memory double extra larges or the quad extra larges, and they run your dynos on that. And that's what we're talking about, just running large numbers of these things. You're going to want some way that if the VMs or the servers disappear, that the apps that are running on them pop up somewhere else. So they're self-healing. Heroku talks about a automatically restart everyone's dynos every day, just to keep them healthy and fresh. And also, if they're not going to survive a restart, you kind of want to know now, as soon as possible, rather than when something bad happens, so it keeps everyone, make sure they behave correctly. You're going to want an API that talks to all this, centralizes it. You're going to want command line tools to talk to the API, and perhaps most importantly, you're going to want traffic to get in. A little bit of a bubble if you've got all these wonderful apps running and there's no way for the internet to get to it. And so the router needs to know what apps are running and where. And then you want, the databases and message buses, etc. And then you've got choices. So this is this question of how do you run this yourself. You have to, if you're going to do this, and truly I think this is fascinating stuff. You can kind of see, well, if I put one on every VM, I've got lots of VMs. If I co-locate them, I have fewer VMs. And certainly I don't have lots of money to spend on running Cloud Foundry, so I run it, put as many things as possible on a single VM, and then I scale out the DEAs. Various different customers, we do it differently for them. But that's kind of it. And there's more bits in Cloud Foundry, I assume. There's a new thing coming out called Flynn. It's based on Docker. There was something that quickly came up called Doku, something like that, which is like it ran inside a single server and sort of demonstrated the principle of building your own paths. And then they went off and they're building something called Flynn, and that might be interesting. So the idea of running your own paths, I think, is going to grow more and more. And so, like when the next Rails Rumble comes out, and once again, no doubt, it'll be sponsored by Linode. The first thing you might do is actually install one of these paths, just so you're like, right, that's done. We don't have to do any more mucking around with config, etc. But now we can just do pushing like we've always done. So I was talking yesterday, and Dave Brady is in town, and we were having a chat. And this has been one of my pet peeves about open source, especially corporate open source, or open source that comes from companies. And my favorite example is a thing called Zipkin. And Zipkin came out from Twitter, and it was a way, it had a beautiful screenshot at the top of the README. It was on GitHub, it was open source, and it had a beautiful screenshot, and the premise of it was you could watch all the traffic coming through your service-oriented architecture. So every request that came through, you could see where it was going and how long it was taking, and sort of start to optimize. And it sounded brilliant. And then they said, and here's the architecture diagram of all the other bits you're going to need to run this. It included Cassandra, which is a non-trivial thing. Now, it has changed since then, but nonetheless, this is the point. It came with Cassandra, you needed Zookeeper, you needed two other things, and one of those itself exploded out into this large diagram of things that you needed to run. And it wasn't the first time that I'd been frustrated that someone had open sourced something without actually telling anyone how to run the bugger. It's kind of rude. What's the point? If I can't run it, if you honestly don't want me to run it, what was the point of open sourcing it? And there are others that I have regular disagreements with Travis on this topic. Like they've open sourced Travis, but they don't really want anyone to run it. And it's not right or wrong, it's just me disagreeing because they're wrong. OpsWorks did it sort of with Chef. Chef server was such a complex thing that no one really wanted to run it themselves. And Cloud Foundry is exactly the same. It's big and complex. And when it first came out, eventually they say, well, here's some Chef recipes. And some people were able to figure out how to run it. The only thing the reason I'm really excited about it, that makes it possible, and the thing I want to demo now, is a thing called Bosch, which actually lets you run complex things. And Bosch could run all of these things. It's hard to do all that because I really focus on Cloud Foundry. But I do want to sort of give a quick intro to a tool that I've built on top of Bosch and on top of Cloud Foundry, so that basically you could deploy all of that stuff with one command line, and then change it over time for the next 5 years as new versions come out. Because I think if it's any harder than that, I don't want to do it. I have a very low tolerance to pain. I work a lot to avoid pain. I'm that guy that, there's something going to take 20 minutes of repetitive behavior. I'll spend 3 days building a tool to avoid the 20 minutes of pain. It's a very twisted life I live. And I've been working on variations of this tool for most of this year. So I'm very excited about this. So this is booting up Cloud Foundry. There's a command called bosh create CF. Currently, you put in the public DNS and perhaps a floating point IP, and it validates those things, double checks that you set that stuff up correctly, confirm that you've got a security group. Ultimately, in a few weeks, it'll automate all of that and build it for you. And then it starts deploying. You've got nothing. You've got no servers. You've got no persistent disks. You've got no, you haven't snapshotted anything yet. And so it says, right, you've got nothing. I'll go and create some stuff. I know that by default, it picks a medium-sized deployment, which is 5 VMs. So sort of some of the things are co-located. And it starts booting them up. This takes 20 minutes or so. So don't think that it's this quick. Manage your expectations. If you've ever watched an Amazon VM boot up, manage your expectations appropriately. They don't all come up the same speed. You can sort of see at the top, it's disappeared. That small 3 took 5.5 minutes to come up. So some of them are fast, some of them are slow. It does then start each of those VMs sequentially, which perhaps could be sped up over time. But it's up. This is Cloud Foundry. Bosh comes with different ways to look at what VMs you've got and what, there's no way you can read that, I understand. But they're the 5 VMs, and it shows you what the health of each one is. So if you've ever built these sorts of tools, I'll be honest, if you've ever watched my Twitter account, for the last year you've probably watched me talk about Bosh. And this is my attempt, again, to try and make Bosh more consumable. Because it does a wonderful array of services, but it's kind of hard to use, I'll be honest. I won't say impossible, because obviously we made it work. But the amount of things it does, and it's open source, does mean that it's a little tricky to work with. So this is an effort to try and hide Bosh. A bit like, if you want to use a Ruby project, you don't go and just get the source from GitHub and then try to compose all the sources. Use Ruby gems. If the project comes with a command line app, you don't have to put that somewhere and then add that to your path. Ruby gems does it. So this tool, the Bosh Cloud Foundry tool, is an attempt to sort of say, great, Bosh does everything, but you don't need to see Bosh. You just deploy this thing and then over time change it. So that's how you run it. It can run on AWS, OpenStack, or vSphere. Someone started adding CloudStack support to Bosh, and someone else has started on a Rackspace CPI. So it's not incomparable to something like Fog, but it's specific in what it's trying to do. What Bosh can do is boot VMs, delete VMs, boot, attach networking, boot disks, delete disks, like 12 different operators. And if you can do those 12 operators, you can have Cloud Foundry and other things running on you. But perhaps the reason that I got excited about Bosh and other people don't is because the time I spent at Engine Yard, where you get to watch several thousand customers go through the life cycle of running production systems and the problems that we had to solve for all of them. So one of the problems we had to solve was stack control. And what I mean by that is at Engine Yard, what we used to do was force everyone to upgrade all the time. Like if you want to go and add a new VM, it's like, I just want to add another VM. That's all I want to do, Engine Yard, is I've got 10 VMs, I want to add one more. And what the product used to force you to do is upgrade, which might break your product, your app, because of your cookbooks plus Engine Yard's cookbooks might not converge. And all you really wanted to do was get past the scaling issue you had right now, and we forced you to upgrade. Customers pretty cranky about that. And obviously the customers that got the most cranky were the most valuable customers. So we implemented stack control, and what that meant was it decoupled when you upgraded from our product's requirements. And so I was aware of that, and that's one of the things you can do with Bosh. Just because a new version of Cloud Foundry comes out, and they come out every week, doesn't mean you have to upgrade. And this tool will support every version that ever came out, and let you upgrade in your own time and scale out in your own time. So I try to make you understand, or help you understand that these are hard problems that it's solving. And if you've never really run big systems or sat next to big systems being run, perhaps you'll never see it. So this is changing something. It comes with it gives you a 4 gig default disk size on the data VM. You might want to change it, because we looked at the VMs, Bosh VMs showed you the perhaps filling up. So now you just give it a bigger number, it'll prompt you to say, is that what you really want to do? And then it goes back to Bosh and says, we want to make this change. And Bosh orchestrates through the change. So on that VM, none of the other VMs get touched, but that VM, the disk will be stopped, a new disk will be brought up, the contents will come over, whatever it is that needs to happen on that particular infrastructure, and then the jobs and everything running on that VM will be restarted. If you've ever had to do this stuff, you'll appreciate someone else automating it. I've done lots of talks on BOSH, so I don't really want to educate you on BOSH because if you're interested, you'll learn it eventually. But this tool means you don't have to. But the idea of why BOSH? Who's ever written chef recipes? Cool. Who's ever written puppet thingies? What are puppet thingies called? Manifests. Who's ever booted a VM server? Who's ever managed physical machines? And my guess, if you've done any of those things, you may have used the same tools, you may have used Chef or Puppet, but every single one of you has either done it manually and or written a bespoke orchestration layer. Right? I mean, Engineer spends tens of millions of dollars on its orchestration layer. We put a nice dashboard on it. When I worked there, but that's part of the core product was an orchestration layer. Heroku have built out their own orchestration of Amazon, and everyone that's ever done it, whether you're manually running knife commands for Chef or whether you've written something that does it automatically, it deeply saddens me that this is not a community-solved problem of managing infrastructure. So that was one of the reasons I fell in love with BOSH. There are lots of reasons. At Engineer, we use Gen2 to manage our OS. And we didn't have any good tooling around. We have better tooling, I believe, now, not as a result of me leaving. But by the time I left, we had better orchestration. But we didn't really have a good way to ship new base images to customers independently, because I can't just force everyone. And so we didn't really have a good way of creating new base images, and we didn't have a good way to get them out to customers. And so what that meant was people couldn't upgrade to new packages because we couldn't get them a new GCC. And these little problems, if you're just booting something up for the first time, you don't care about these problems. But if you think about the life of a system or of your application over 5 years, 60 months, it's not the challenges to be solved aren't the first. Then Paz sort of says, hey, look how awesome the first month is. The challenges in running systems is the next 59 months. Where not just your application is going to change over and over every day, but you're going to change what version of MySQL you're going to use. You're going to change what packages you're going to use. You're going to change what OS you're going to do kernel patching. You're going to perhaps move from one infrastructure to another infrastructure. And that's why I like BOSH. Because BOSH has this magnificent goal of making all that possible. So we've all heard of the Unix principle of one thing that does something well. That is not BOSH. It does not care about doing one thing well. It wants to do everything. Which, there are definitely pros and cons to that. Like, why does it have its own packaging system? I can't answer that question. I mean, I know it does, and I know the benefits of it are, but why they didn't choose to just use one of the off-the-shelf packaging systems and bundle it, not entirely sure. But whatever. So we did, what I just showed was how simple it is to change the system, but also upgrading will be as equally simple. They've just started cutting weekly releases. So like if you're doing OpenStack stuff, like 6 monthly releases are sort of stable. Because Cloud Foundry is run in production, whatever they're running in production is cut, and that's then the open source version. It's a really hard thing to do, is to have an open source project that's also your production company, money-making system. And if you ever were faced with this problem, perhaps you would have invented these tools as well. But it's pretty impressive. So, what else? What else? I'd like to spend all the rest of the time just helping you boot this thing up. It's 2 commands, it really is. And there's 2 tools. So firstly, the templates. There's a premise of how is this even possible that new versions can come out and you can keep using the same tools on perhaps legacy stuff. And there's a whole system around templates such that it knows for any given version of Cloud Foundry that came out, for any given infrastructure you might be running it on, and whatever deployment size, there's a template. And perhaps I'm just impressing myself. You don't appreciate the problem that's trying to be solved. But it really is as easy as the video. And there are just 2 tools you need to use. One is to get BOSH running, which I completely skipped over. BOSH is like Chef Server. It's a thing that runs. You're going to run it on one VM or many VMs, and there's one command line to run for that. That's that command line at the top, which you can't read. BOSH bootstrap deploy. And it asks you some questions. If you've ever used Fog before, and you've got a .fog file, it will just steal that and start using it. And then you'll have Bosh. It takes about 10 minutes, and it's pretty quick. And then you'll have the problem of how do I deploy my Cloud Foundry? And then you use the tool we sort of talked about, which is you just run Bosh prepare CF, which is going to upload a bunch of stuff to the Bosh. Because Bosh owns the universe. When you're deploying something to Bosh, it does not go out to the rest of the world and say, oh, Ruby gems, are you awake? Are you up? I'd like some gems, please. GitHub, any chance that you could do something for me today? So if you're very experienced or you've been inconvenienced by those two systems, which are the ones that come to mind, Debian possibly have outages, I'm sure. Bosh says, you know, I'm going to be in charge of everything. All right, just give me all the bits and I will guarantee that this works. And so that's what the prepare step is. It's giving it the base stem cell, the image, the OS image. So on Amazon, it's giving it the bits that are going to become an AMI. On OpenStack, it's going to give it the bits that become an OpenStack image. And then the create CF is where it starts booting up VMs. And they're the projects. I could talk for hours, and I chose not to, because I don't want to make a second point. I've done this thing for 6 months. This is awesome. You know, if you don't need to run Cloud Foundry, I hope at least now that you meet someone, they work in a crap environment, and they want to have nice shiny toys, you can either send them to me, and I'll fix them up. Well, what I'll do is I'll tell them, go and read these two things. Or you can point them to these two projects and say, you can run your own Cloud Foundry. Anyone can have nice things. Nice things are for everyone. I don't want to stop. But I think that we should use the rest of the time to look at those two projects and to run them. Except they take like hours to run. Building up infrastructure from scratch isn't quick, all right? The quickness happens later on when you get to containers, but managing OpenStack and moving gigabytes of bits around is not quick. So I hope down the track that you have Cloud Foundry size problems for your company. I hope you all go back into crap working environments and you think, I need to fix this. And I'm going to use Cloud Foundry because I think it's going to solve most of those sorts of problems. So thank you very much.